Is this on? Oh, fantastic. I'm just going to move that a little bit higher as I'm a giant. Okay, I hope everyone had a lovely lunch. I think we're going to be kicking off the afternoon sessions now, although I'm sure a few people might still be filtering in. A warm welcome back to our virtual attendees as well. We hope lots of you can stay with us for what promises to be a very, very interesting afternoon session. So as a quick reminder, we're going to have Mr. Yi-Chong Tae from Ofcom giving a keynote address. Then we're going to be moving into a workshop-style panel on encryption. We're going to look at transparency and AI, and we're going to end the day by looking at how to avoid internet fragmentation. So we've got a very busy schedule ahead. I'm very pleased to welcome shortly Mr. Tae, the Group Director for Strategy and Research at Ofcom. Yi-Chong will present the results of Ofcom's 2022 Online Nation Report and discuss some key findings, exploring synergies with other broad themes in this year's UK IGF, including online harms and digital inequality from this morning, and a little bit of a look ahead to the themes that we're going to be exploring this afternoon. So encryption, transparency and AI, and avoiding internet fragmentation. So it's quite a busy presentation ahead. And just as a quick reminder, at the end of the speech, there will be an opportunity to ask questions, both for those online, which will be facilitated through Nick and Elise in the room, and for those in person with us. So please do note down any questions or anything you'd like to raise in advance. Mr. Tae.
Just check I'm able to turn on the mic. Very good. Thank you, Bella. Good afternoon, and thank you very much to the UK IGF for having me today. For most people in the UK, being online is a major, indeed integral part of daily life. Being online allows us to connect with others, sometimes in ways that just isn't possible offline. We already benefit enormously from a breadth of diverse online services, from messaging and calling platforms to gaming platforms, online news outlets and online shopping. And there's much to look forward to with ever more immersive technologies such as virtual and augmented reality, with applications to health and education, as well as enterprise services and entertainment. But we also know from Ofcom research that alongside the benefits, being online can have negative implications. Since publishing Online Nation 2022 in June, we've been busy putting together new consumer research to better understand online experiences and to prepare us for our oncoming online safety duties, as we were discussing in the first panel this morning. Over the next few minutes, I'll draw on our Online Nation report, as well as some of these newer findings. Okay, so what does it mean to be an online nation? Well, we're spending a vast amount of time online, 4 hours online a day to be exact in September 2021. That's across phones, tablets, and computers, though not connected TVs. Young adults continue to spend the most time, 18 to 24-year-olds spending just over 5 hours a day. In contrast, those aged over 55 are the least, just under 3 hours. We're increasingly a smartphone-orientated nation. Of the time we spend online, most of that's on a smartphone, 3 out of 4 hours a day. And in fact, 1 out of 5 people only use a smartphone to go online in 2021. That's in contrast to the previous year where it was 1 in 10, quite a dramatic shift. But increased smartphone reliance exposes the digital exclusion reality. We touched on that in the last panel a little. While increased smartphone use is, of course, a positive indicator of increasing adoption of modern technology, it also gives us insights into digital exclusion in the UK. For example, if you're a younger person or from a lower socioeconomic background or among the most financially vulnerable, you're more likely to have to rely on a smartphone for internet access. And as we were discussing earlier, relying solely on your smartphone has its limitations. If you've tried completing a form or working on a document on a smartphone rather than a laptop, I think you'll know what I mean. Those everyday activities can suddenly be rather torturous. And data constraints can be an issue if you're relying on a mobile internet connection. During the pandemic, more people moved online, but there are still those without access. The pandemic, fortunately a fading memory, I hope, highlighted how isolating it was not to be online, as we relied on the internet for communication, health information, entertainment, shopping, and downloading COVID passports. In our research, we noticed a significant uplift in those who got online in 2020 as people watched videos on YouTube and TikTok and reached out virtually to grandchildren and loved ones. But some are still resistant to getting connected. In 2021, 6% of households had no internet access, and that figure's remained pretty stable across the year. Now, the reasons for not being online vary. We've been monitoring digital exclusion for some time. If I'm direct, in the past, we've mainly focused on the question of broadband availability. But that's not necessarily the issue for all, as we discussed in the last panel. Our Connected Nations data tells us that only 0.3% of UK homes and businesses could not get decent broadband, that's 10 megabits per second, in May of this year. So what's going on? Well, as we discussed earlier, and it's backed up by the research, data poverty, or where your financial situation may limit your access to the internet and devices, plays a big part. As you'll see on the slide, those who are older, aged over 75, are much more likely to not have internet access at home, as well as those from a lower socioeconomic background and the most financially vulnerable. Our survey also shows that some people are not connected due to a lack of interest or feeling like they don't have a need for the internet. And others are excluded because they lack the digital skills to engage effectively. Our mission at Ofcom is to make communications work for everyone. And so we want to see the opportunity and choice for all. It strikes me that while I may well be concerned when my children spend too much time online, equally, if their grandparents are not online at all, that can raise a different set of challenges. Given the many benefits that we all experience from being online, one of our ambitions is for everyone to have the opportunity to have the connectivity and devices that they need to be online and included, and the skills to participate fully and safely so that individuals can then make their own choices. So what have we learned so far as we prepare for a broader set of duties? Well, for the majority of us, the benefits of being online outweigh the risks. 7 in 10 internet users told us they believe exactly this. Just under half of internet users agree that they can share their opinions and have a voice online. However, attitudes to being online can vary depending on who you are, how much you use the internet, and even your demographic profile, such as gender or ethnicity. For example, women are less likely to feel they can share their opinions and have a voice more easily online, and less likely to feel free to be themselves online compared to men. Teenagers aged 13 to 17 are more likely to agree that being online has an overall positive effect on their mental health compared to other ages. And for all the benefits of being online, there are, of course, concerns about user safety. Over 6 in 10 UK internet users report at least one instance of potentially harmful behavior or content online that they've seen recently. And as you might expect, heavier users of the internet are more likely to experience harms compared to others. But harm online can occur in different ways. Our recent study on the risk factors that may lead children to harm online underlines how we all experience online harms differently. As we were touching in the morning, one of the most obvious routes to harm would be stumbling across a violent video on a social media feed, what we might call an isolated exposure to a hazard. But what I found really interesting is we've learned that experiencing more severe harm can be linked to that cumulative exposure, passively absorbing social media content, for example, about body image, consistently over time. And cumulative active engagement with certain channels or content, for example, a pro-anorexia forum, can then self-reinforce certain behavior and cause more significant and severe harm. Now, I wanted to share some recent findings that we have about attitudes to age verification, which of course we were touching on this morning. Now, I think that might be best demonstrated by hearing from the users themselves rather than me, so I'd like to show you a short video clip. Word of caution, if I may. This video is taken from our Children's Media Live study, which we've obtained permission to share at this event. But to protect the privacy of the participants, the organisers have kindly agreed to edit it out of the recording of the event. And I'd ask you not to take any photos or record the footage on your mobile phone or other devices. Okay, with that, hopefully the technology will work. And
age restrictions exist?
in summary, we all know a minimum age requirement on a platform is no guarantee currently to children not visiting that site on a regular basis. It's great that some platforms have some safety measures in place. We already regulate UK established video sharing platforms, and we've just published our first review of the safety measures that video sharing platforms have put in place. But our newly published research, commissioned together with the Information Commissioner's Office, found that a third of children aged between 8 and 17 with a social media profile have an adult user age after signing up with a false date of birth. But why does an online age for a child matter? Well, as they get older, so does their claimed user age. And this means that they can be placed at greater risk of encountering age inappropriate or harmful content online. For example, if an 8-year-old gives a false date of birth and say claims to be 13 in order to get on the platform, when they're actually 13, their profile age will be 18. Content recommendation algorithms then at that point can offer up adult content with greater risk of exposure to harm. Of course, none of this is easy. My son has just started secondary school, and with it, that adjustment to his first year having a mobile phone, independent travel on the underground. As a parent, that tension of wanting to keep our children safe, but at the same time not wanting to completely socially exclude them is all too real. And maintaining an openness to talk about what services they're using, what they're doing, is super important. And I've certainly discovered that digital literacy and critical awareness is ever more important, as are, I think, the partnerships between platforms and parents and teachers. But looking ahead to the future, we've never lived in an age where technological development and innovation has been so rapid. So the prospects look pretty bright for the tech-driven, gadget-loving online consumer. The metaverse is often cited as the great thing on the horizon, particularly reinforced by Meta's recent TV ads promoting its virtual reality or VR headsets used by surgeons, say, for training purposes. For now, our research indicates that consumer adoption of VR headsets is still in its infancy, for a range of reasons, I guess, including price, the complexity of some devices, or perhaps most simply, the fact that wearing a headset just doesn't appeal to some. I mean, similarly, wearing special glasses in order to watch 3D TV about a decade ago seemed to put some people off. To put this in perspective, we found that 7% of households had a VR headset. But things can change quickly. For example, online gaming, which in many respects has been the most converged media of all, combining entertainment with communication, cinematic storytelling with immersive participation. That was one of the reasons I was keen to explore gaming in depth in our Online Nation report this year. The gaming industry is at the forefront of VR adoption. Among those who game, 42% have played VR games using a headset, the most popular being the PlayStation VR headset, but a quarter use Oculus or MetaQuest headsets, and we anticipate new AR/VR headset products from Apple and Google soon. So the headsets are coming, and perhaps the focus is more compelling games and content to make the purchase really worthwhile. Gaming has for decades been one of the drivers of tech innovation and take-up of technologies and devices in the home. Popular services like Second Life, Fortnite, Roblox, and Minecraft have been regarded as early metaverses in the sense that they've leveraged some of the potential technologies. As developers continue to make their games more immersive, hardware requirements increase, increasing demand for better performance, faster, more powerful chips, the demand for lower latency, faster connections, and the drive for super fast and increasingly ultra fast broadband. And the popularity of playing games on phones, of course, has been critically important to the development of mobile app ecosystems, following on from the popularity of downloading Java games for feature phones in the early 2000s, if you remember that long ago. Okay, so as online services continue to evolve, so do the challenges faced by everyday users, industry, and the regulator. So as I draw to a close, what does all of this mean for Ofcom as we think about our mission to make communications work for everyone? Let me highlight, if I may, 3 priorities for us: online safety, digital markets, and media literacy. In our upcoming online safety duties, we're mindful that with the arrival of new immersive technologies comes an amazing opportunity and benefit, but it also comes with the potential for new or different harms. There may be more sophisticated forms of abuse, for example, enabled by deep fake technology. As we heard earlier this morning, data privacy and protecting against scams is another example. We reported in our Online Nation report that scams, fraud, and phishing is the most commonly experienced potential harm. And our research shows that while a large majority of those who go online consider themselves confident internet users, a third weren't making appropriate checks on registering personal details online. Industry has a key role to play, taking responsibility for user safety by providing the tools so users can protect themselves. Personal space boundaries for avatars like those used by Meta may be one example. The safety tech industry is an ever-expanding field, experimenting with much-needed technical solutions to keep people safe. For example, software that identifies harmful language on messenger services that can then prompt the sender to just think again whether they really want to send that message. We anticipate and encourage more innovations in this space. Second, as people communicate seamlessly online and offline, we now need to invest our efforts in making digital communications work for everyone, promoting competition as well as protecting people, working closely with other digital regulators as part of the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum. As commercial business models evolve, for example, driven by monetization of data about what services we use, what we watch, what we buy, an understanding of that underlying economic incentive is a key part to effective, coherent regulation, so that we understand how well digital markets are functioning for consumers and grapple with some of the underlying causes, not just some of the symptoms like harmful content. We recently set out our approach to digital markets in the communications sector, including a study to assess the strength of competition in cloud services and the position of some key companies such as Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. Finally, the future also brings new media and digital literacy challenges for all of us. Media literacy matters so we can all participate online. It matters that those on the edges of our society can also benefit from being connected. And it matters that we all know not just how to stay safe online, but that we have the skills and confidence to flourish online, to do the things we enjoy, access the services we need, and connect with those we love. In a rapidly evolving world, as our digital identities grow in importance and we adapt to new technologies, we can expect to need to invest more in this area. In conclusion, I'm proud of our international reputation for first-class research. Our research and data are very much the foundation as we prepare for new online safety duties. And my ambition is that we will be continually learning and committed to our goal of making the internet a safer place for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to double check that microphone can pick me up. Thank you so much for such an interesting and really thought-provoking presentation, providing a really helpful overview of the Online Nation report, which is available online.
Indeed.
Published back in June. I think we've all noticed many synergies with key themes and topics explored in earlier panels today: digital exclusion, the issue of accessibility, harms and risk factors faced by different identities in different ways. Thank you also for sharing such a powerful video and also sharing your own experience as a parent with children, going online for the first time or, in different ways. I would like to open up the floor to Q&A, but before I do so, maybe I could ask a first question. You mentioned the importance of partnerships, maybe between parents, platforms, and teachers, as you mentioned, or between regulators, for example, between Ofcom and the ICO. What do future-ready partnerships look like in this space, bearing in mind the disruptive impact of emerging technologies, such as deepfakes, VR, AR, and so on?
It's a great question. And I might start by observing, I think the nature of regulation as we look forward is changing from where we were, say, 10, 20 years ago. I'm very conscious that in some old world, if I think about content regulation in a broadcast world, where of course we've got a great track record of protecting audiences, but at the same time protecting freedom of expression. But in that world, we had some great tools. You know, ultimately, if you do something which is not consistent with the broadcasting code, in very severe cases, we can remove your license. And in this online world, we just don't have those same tools. So I think it becomes more of a collaboration amongst different parties to make this work. So I think those partnerships will look different in different areas, but there's both a domestic and an international, as we touched on this morning, aspect of that. Domestically, because on some of these things, if I think about online safety, it's about us collaborating with law enforcement on some of the illegal stuff. We may well have the tools, once this regime is up and running, to monitor systems and processes the platforms have in place to ensure that they're doing risk assessments and bringing transparency. But ultimately, if this is about, I don't know, child sexual abuse material, then those issues will be taken forward by law enforcement. And then on the international front, as John touched on this morning, we're very aware that these are global platforms, and this is going to work a whole lot better at a scale level where you have a degree of consistency with a number of different regimes. So we're putting lots of effort into working with other countries who are similarly like-minded, whether that's the e-Safety Commissioner in Australia or other places.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to open it up to the floor, and I'd like to especially encourage our women participants and our younger participants to ask some questions as well, but both those in person with us today, but also those joining online. Your questions will be read out by Elise and Nick in the front row. Any first questions? In the blazer.
Hi. Yeah, that was really good facts and finding that you presented there. I just have a question on one of the things that Ofcom you're mentioning that they want to focus on is media literacy, and there's some challenges there. I can only speak from my experience in Scotland, in Edinburgh. When approaching public schools, private schools says they do not have the funding to have media literacy people coming in and speaking to them. They said it's quite an underfunded program in private schools itself. And the only thing that happens is Internet Safety Week, a tick in the box that we've done that, but media literacy should be something that's ongoing in school. Do you have anything in mind in terms of working with school to make this a continuous program rather than a tick in a box for most of schools saying that they have introduced media literacy in some form or another?
It's a great question, and I have some resonance with your question, having gone to school in Edinburgh when I grew up. I don't have great experience, having said that, actually, in the generality of what school provision looks like on media literacy, other than my own children's schools and what they do in it, which I've had some engagement with them on, and it's great to see schools who are grappling with these issues and trying to take it forward. I think my observation in terms of Ofcom's role is this is a huge area, of course, where we're very mindful that there are, of course, all sorts of resource constraints for everyone. And so part of our role in media literacy, where we have broad powers which have been in place since Ofcom was established quite some time ago, we see that as, on the one hand, providing that research base, which the media literacy community can draw on as a means of spotlighting what is going on and what initiatives work and what initiatives don't work. That evaluation piece is really important to us. But a big part of what we're trying to do is essentially convene lots of parties to try and coordinate and make more efficient the various media literacy provision. Some of the platforms like Google and Meta put a certain amount of effort into initiatives like Be Internet Citizens and things like that, and engage with schools. So whilst that's not our role directly as Ofcom, we're very keen to try and help a collection of different parties make progress on that.
Can I ask the Nominet team if there's any questions that have come through online that you'd like to raise? Okay, then I'll turn back to the room. Do we have any questions in the front row?
Thanks very much. Michael Tunks from the Internet Watch Foundation. I was really interested in the report that Ofcom published a couple of weeks ago on the VSP regime. I think that showed us actually that there's a start into how we might regulate through the online safety bill. And there was a number of interesting recommendations that sort of came out of that. One of the areas that I was interested in, you've just mentioned it, is risk assessment and transparency, which are going to be two areas that are going to be very much key to delivering the online safety regime. And in the conclusion on the VSP regime, you sort of suggest that companies don't know how to risk assess, that there was a real gap there between preparedness for regulation on the VSP side, and also that didn't matter whether that was the size of company, whether that was a large company or whether that was a small company. So I thought that was some interesting findings. How do we best prepare companies that are going to be within scope of the regulation of the online safety bill to prepare for risk assessment, and how can we play our part in helping to assist you with that?
Thank you. That's a great question, and very much appreciate the partnership that we have with Internet Watch Foundation. I think this is in part a journey. We talked a little bit this morning about how when we get legislation, it won't be perfect, but we need to start somewhere. And of course, we've been on the journey for some time already, so we're very keen to make progress, and it'll probably be a bit iterative. I think one of my observations to your question as well is that it's partly about regulation, but a big part of this is about corporate governance, actually. You know, I've been in dialogue with some of the platforms for a number of years. That's one of the benefits, I guess, of quite a long journey. I think last time I was on the West Coast talking to platforms was pre-pandemic in 2019. But having that engagement and those conversations where you start to raise the issues, I think is really important. I think the video sharing platform regime is really helpful to us because it allows us to put some things in place in a more targeted, the scope is more constrained than the online safety bill, and we learn things, frankly, through that, as I hope the platforms do. So I think a big part of this, as you said, is transparency. How do we shine a spotlight on what are they actually doing at the moment? Where is that falling short? And we raise awareness, generally speaking. But it's going to take time. So I don't think, you know, I don't think just on wireless sense suddenly everything's going to get fixed. But it's such a critical challenge that we all have to rise to.
In the pink sweater.
Hi, Jess from Voicebox. We've recently noticed an increase on increasing rate of deepfakes on the internet, and I was wondering if you had any insight into the dangers that they can cause and any way to defend against them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the consequences of the benefits of rapid technological development, of course, that technology can be used for great things and also rather less good things. I don't have a simple answer to how we prepare for that. I think a couple of things. We think it's really important, as you see from the research, that we invest in our understanding of these developments. We put quite a lot of work into our horizon scanning program, so we are well informed, I hope, of things coming down the track, and similarly around things like emerging technology. I think the other thing I'd observe is that in designing regulation and legislation, you want that to be as technologically neutral as possible. We had Damien speaking earlier about, of course, you want to ensure that the online safety bill isn't tied to particular technologies, so that when things like this develop, or you're suffering the same sort of harms, not on a screen, but on a VR headset, that somehow that's not evading the regulation. And I think that takes me to a combination of making sure we're researching and looking forwards, engaging with those involved in the technology. For us, a big challenge has been making sure that we can recruit the right sort of expertise and talent and tech and data, but also as you think about the design of regulation, that it's about outcomes and principles, online safety being about systems and processes, not the very kind of prescriptive regulatory stuff on what you see right here and now. Sorry, that's not a particularly satisfactory answer to your question.
Unless we have any further questions online in the grey blazer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. So I was interested in your point that you made earlier about working with other governments that are potentially similarly minded, that are trying to pass legislation on online safety as well. I was curious if you'd be able to speak more about that. I think also in relation to, I know we have a panel later today about internet fragmentation and thinking about kind of if there's this convoluted or just fragmented regulatory regime at the global level, what does that mean for the possibilities of companies not being interested in working in certain countries because of the complexity or the costs, or just curious what I guess Ofcom is doing in that kind of engagement work, to what extent you can speak to it, of course.
It's a great question. A couple of thoughts, I think. One of the things where I feel encouraged is when I talk to some of the large tech firms, they're actually quite complimentary about what Ofcom does. I find that slightly surprising. They will sometimes say, we invest in understanding actually what is going on, that we're pretty pragmatic about how we're trying to get to an answer, and we're prepared to be open to discuss with them how to get to where we need to, but understanding where they're starting from, as opposed to a much more kind of prescriptive, you just need to take down a bunch of stuff within 24 hours or whatever it might be. The other thing that strikes me is when I'm at international conferences, I earlier in the year was at Asia Tech in Singapore. It's a great opportunity to speak with Asian regulators and see how they're approaching some of these global challenges. Actually, that's one area where I get reminded that we've got great research, and I sometimes forget that until other regulators point that out to me. But just seeing how different countries or jurisdictions approach the questions, as I said, sometimes in this area, the inclination is to say, right, we just need to find a way of taking down stuff. And well, that might be appropriate in some instances, but as I've kind of said, I think there's something about being outcomes focused, where we try and understand the systems and processes, because we just can't chase after every little bit of content here. It's a completely different ball game from broadcast content. And I'd like to think that actually by engaging on that world stage, we can help drive a sensible and reflective debate on how we work together to make these things work most effectively.
Fantastic, thank you. We have a question from a virtual attendee, and then maybe we can also do the question up there, and then we'll be wrapping up this session and moving on to encryption so that we keep the time, please.
Thank you. So I have a question from Jen Pearson from Defend Digital Me. Re-emerging tech, some of these are now very new, make grand claims that turn out to be overhyped, like the ICO just issues a warning on emotional AI last week. Will Ofcom consider mandating publication of tech companies' error rates and how well tech works, both that it is done at the moment and in any new behavioural monitoring tech as a result of the online safety bill? Thank you.
Well, I might observe what we mandate or not is, of course, determined by what powers were given in any legislation that's yet to be finalized. So I can't quite answer that question. But I think my starting point would probably be, yes, that it's important that we provide transparency to what's going on. And I think that's an important part of the regime in terms of ensuring platforms are held to account on what they're doing. And I think we can make a lot of progress by this stuff being a lot more transparent. But more than that, I guess I was saying earlier, I think it's about making sure that we understand how the technology is developing. Some of that's about having the right expertise. Some of it's about, and not necessarily in a kind of more enforcement way, but actually engagement with the platforms, perhaps less formally, so we understand how they're developing their services, and we understand what their roadmaps are to a certain degree.
And I think a final question from Nigel, and then we'll be wrapping up.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your presentation. It's always a real interest to read the facts and figures that your research throws up. Yeah, Nigel Hickson, DCMS. Very quickly, and apologies if this was covered this morning in the online safety session, which unfortunately I missed. But I'm interested in the sort of linkage or between age verification, which I think you pointed out is an essential requirement, and especially in the legislation, as I understand it, in terms of the differentiation of obligations that platforms would face depending on who their clientele is. So, what I'm interested in is how and whether, in your discussions with the platforms and your discussions with the, if you like, the legislators in this context, there's a dichotomy here. There's a problem, because will the platforms be able to satisfy the obligations in the bill by continuing to provide services? And then that finally links to the expectations that was talked about in the panel just before lunch and in this talk here, that for many people the internet is the internet. And
Nigel, I'm very sorry. Do you think you could get to your question?
Yes,
I'm very sorry. We're running a little bit behind time.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I do waffle. Well, it really was that the linkage is there, and whether the platforms will be able to honour these obligations in a way and still provide services to the UK market.
I'll be brief. We'll see where we end up with the legislation. I'm sure we can make progress. Two things that strike me. One, some of the stuff we can make progress by doing quite small things. So, for example, on one platform, I know when you attempt to register, it brings up an age, or it used to do this at least, and the age would be 18 years prior to today's date. And some of what we were talking about earlier, the kind of behavioral insight there is it's very easy if you're a child just to click yes. You haven't even had to do the arithmetic of what does it take to get to 13 years earlier or whatever. So I think there are some small changes which will make a difference. Secondly, yes, some of this is hard in terms of, as we touched on earlier this morning, on how do you do age verification? And actually, some of the research we put out recently I thought was really interesting, because it sort of said, actually, parents are quite happy with self-certification because it basically allows children in some instances to circumvent it. Okay, interesting. But otherwise, they feel comfortable going to hard identifiers like passports or some of those things that they're used to for buying alcohol in a shop. But a greater reticence for facial recognition technologies or behavioral insights. And that says something to me about how it's also a question of how as a society we get to trust certain things and get comfortable with how do we do this. So I suspect there are a number of questions for different parts of the jigsaw.
Thank you so much. I'd like to ask everyone to join me in thanking Mr. Yi Chong Tae.